Hey everybody, it is Whenever You're here, and I'm going to talk about what is kind of a touchy subject, or potentially a touchy subject. As you know, I'm going to be running a tabletop Pathfinder game for my kids who are 11 and 10, and some other kids in the neighborhood who are about the same age. And the question of morality came up when I was reading this adventure, and I'll get to how in a second. But so let me start off by saying for me, I like putting the players in difficult positions and letting them figure their way out. And that includes morality issues too, morality situations. It's like, ooh, now what do? We got a problem here, guys, like a real problem. Because I try to keep role-playing. I don't want my role-playing games to devolve into just another board game or an MMO feel, like D&D 4th edition. I want them to actually feel like it's a living, breathing world, and there are very real consequences for what the players choose to do. Now, but so where's the line though? And again, I think it depends a lot on the group. Some groups love that stuff. Some groups would hate me for putting them in that sort of position. They're just there to kill stuff. And I understand where that comes from. I dealt with, when I was in the force, I dealt with a lot of heavy stuff all the time. I didn't want to necessarily come and sit down and play D&D and deal with heavy stuff all the time. And for the most part, I didn't have D&Ds or DMs that were that necessarily into that. But I could see where that wears a little thin. But you want to keep the world realistic too, and you don't want it to become kick in the door, kill the monster, take its loot. This is supposed to be kind of a relatively real feeling world with real consequences based on the situations. So a lot of it depends on the group. Now, to gauge a new group, I've used the same scenario twice over. And it was deliberately, at their very first game, designed to put them in a moral situation, and I wanted to see how they reacted. And I wasn't trying to screw them over or create a stressful situation, but I wanted to learn something about them, the players, and the characters they were playing. So basically, I lifted the idea from the opening of Record of Lodoss War, the anime. Town gets attacked by a bunch of goblins. Townspeople, over and over. Town gets together and kind of goes, "Oh crap, we gotta go deal with this problem here." Because we can't predict when and where they're going to attack. We got to figure out where they live and go in and take them out. So the party gets together and goes after them, tracks them down to their lair, and has to do the dungeon crawl, a small one because it's only level 1, to fill out their to end the goblin threat. And I usually try to tie in the players as being part of the cause of the threat, how things kind of ramped up at the same time. So I'll give them some personal motivation in this, skin in the game. But once they clear the cave out, they come across, all the way in the back of the cave, goblin women and children who are just huddled there, scared to death. And at that point, I just sort of sit back and I let the players figure out how they're going to handle this. And, it's an interesting thing to watch because some players are very good at staying in character with their morality. Saying, yeah, well, my character is okay doing X because, I don't look at me, don't give me that look, guys. I would never do that, but my character's a little more blasé about this. Other players cannot separate the two, and their character is always going to kind of have some level of their personal morality. And again, that's a difficult thing for a lot of players to kind of divorce yourself from. And some players, they don't even think that deep when they design a character, depending on the type of player. You've got the players who the game's just mechanics to them. They don't really, it's everything else is just artwork. It's pixel art over a wireframe, 3D object to interact with the rest of the world. Other players, don't really think about that. Like, man, what if my character was confronted with this type of situation? And they'll write stuff like that into their background. And, I appreciate that. But, in one instance, the players were like, we don't know what we're going to do. Hey, I'll watch him, guys. Okay, no problem. and that player passes me a note and says, hey, as soon as everybody's out of the room, I kill them all. You sure about that? Yep. Okay. All right. Everybody here is suddenly screaming and shouting from the next room, and by the time you get back in there, the deed is done. And boy, was there some reactions to that, in and out of character. Some players were really, I mean, some players were very frustrated at the unilateral decision made by that player. Now that player was like, look, look, this is what my character would do. This is an evil race that is threatening the town. We let these women and children go. They're just going to be back at us, our throats again in 10 years. No, I'm not going to do that. They attacked us. They attacked us. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that's not the discussion. I'm discussing the consequences of putting players into that kind of moral situation, and kind of the consequences of what happens amongst the group. Now, of course, we kept on playing beyond that, but it was definitely, people eyed that character in game because they weren't sure if he was going to make other unilateral decisions without consulting the group when it came to sticky situations like that. So again, my goal was never to put the players in an uncomfortable or difficult position for the sake of putting them in an uncomfortable position. It was to put them in a challenging position to see how they reacted. Mainly in character, but also out of character too. Because if somebody reacts badly to that scenario out of character, like personally, maybe they're not a good fit for the group. Maybe you as the DM need to decide, okay, this isn't the sort of scenarios I should put this party in. And some parties will flat out say, man, we don't want that. We get what you're going for, that's cool. The game's getting a little too dark and heavy. Okay, great. And that's always important to communicate with your DM. There's a lot of permutations on how to handle that and when it's good, when it's bad. And as a DM, you need to kind of adjust for the players. I like dark and heavy. I love World of Darkness. I'm an old school goth. Sorry, it's my thing. It's what gets me going. So, but I have to remind myself at times that's not everybody's ballywick. I don't need to turn every D&D game into, Vampire the Masquerade. While I might be enjoying it, that doesn't mean the players are. However, going back to the main point of morality, I was reading through that initial scenario set in Otari for the beginner's box, and a moral decision came up. Now, I don't know whether the designers intended this to be a moral decision, but when I thought about it, and I went, it's a moral decision. Now, I will set the stage. So if you don't want any spoilers for that starting box, skip ahead maybe 5 minutes or whatever. But setting it up, I'll explain it. So basically the players deal with kobolds the entire run of the adventure. There's some traps and other stuff. Well, partway through the adventure, so it's all kobolds mainly to start with, a couple, wild animals and whatnot. But, the obligatory giant rat. But then at one point, because the dungeon they're in connects to the equivalent of the Underdark in this world, some other denizens of the Underdark, troglodytes, they call them something different in Pathfinder, but I'm going to use the term troglodyte, comes up, kind of meanders their way up into the kobolds area. And when the players come across them, the encounter explicitly states that they are not going to pay attention to the characters until they're not going to notice the characters. So the characters are able to kind of approach them and kind of go, oh, okay, what are we dealing with here? Without them noticing right away because they're busy divvying out their treasure. Well, here's the dilemma for players. Oh, another monster. Kill it. Loot it. Move on to the next. Really? That's not an evil, you don't consider that a problematic thing to do? This is a completely different species than what you're dealing with. Without any other knowledge, you just attack and kill it and take its stuff. And you're okay with that. Now, there are other, or the player's going to go, whoa, hold on. We can't just kill something outright, guys. We don't know what the deal is. We don't know whether they're in league with the kobolds. We don't know what's going on. Let's, take our time and think about it. So those are the kind of two extremes. And there are other variations in the middle there, because some players may go, okay, do I recognize them? Okay, we'll make a knowledge whatever check. Yeah, okay, you know that they are, okay, let's say they're successful. You recognize them by their common term, troglodytes. You know that they are incredibly aggressive towards non-troglodytes, and whatever kind of tidbits you can give them. So now it's a little different, because now they have some information that these things might attack them right away, but they still haven't. And remember, I'm running for kids that are actually a little bit below what a lot of average ages would be. Now, I started playing when I was about 10. But most people would say about 12 to 13 is the best age. But my kids have shown an interest, and some of the other kids in the neighborhood are excited about it too. So I'm like, yeah, whatever. We'll go for it. And like I said before, if they don't like it, they don't like it. That's fine. I'm not going to force them to play. But again, how are my kids going to react to this sort of situation? Now, my first response is, well, I'm going to just remove this scenario altogether, and I'm going to replace it with kobolds. Because now it's like, okay, we are down here fighting kobolds. When we come across kobolds, we know they're going to be hostile towards us. That's a different scenario. Or you come across a giant spider, waiting there in its nest, and you catch it while it's kind of going into hiding because it's maybe a trapdoor style spider. Well, that thing's going to attack. It's an animal. It's a gigantic spider. It's a trapdoor spider. It's going to come out and get you. That's a little different. But when you see a humanoid race that's clearly having a discussion amongst itself, divvying out some resources or whatnot, or food or whatever, your first, and that is something that you have to ask yourself is, what would my character do? Would my character recognize them? That depends. How would we respond? Is it a evil race? Which gets into some of that a little more of a sticky situation when it comes to, how do you handle the evil races within the Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder setting? Now, that's a different video, and I do want to tackle that one. But back to this situation. Originally, I was going to swap them out for just 3 kobolds divvying up spoils. But then I changed my mind and I said, I think it's okay to put them in this situation. Now, I'm going to do it as gently as possible. Remember, my girlfriend's going to be playing along with the kids. I haven't talked with her about this beforehand. But if the kids get into this mentality of, kick in the door, kill it, take its loot, just like an MMO or something like that. Well, this is a good time to maybe, as the DM, pump the brakes and say, hold on, guys. Put yourself in your character's shoes and think about this a little bit. Now, the entry for these particular monsters is that they will aggressively attack because they are xenophobic, basically. And they would attack the kobolds just as quickly as they would attack the party members. The party just happens to be the ones to stumble upon them. But still, it's worth it at this point to take this time, pump the brakes maybe, and go, think about this. Put yourself in your character's shoes. Imagine you are standing there. Are you okay just attacking somebody unprovoked? You don't know who these people are. You don't know what they're about. You don't know what their deal is. And you don't have any reason to assume that they're going to be aggressive at this point. Barring other factors that may develop leading into the encounter. So I opted to go ahead and leave it in there as a real potential learning opportunity for how role-playing works, for how to think in a moral way when you don't necessarily have real-world consequences to think about. Because you may want to go shoot the bully at school, okay, but you understand that are there real-world consequences for that right off the bat, but there are moral consequences that you will suffer. Well, when you're removed in talking about a character that you're simply playing, there's a disconnect. And you know, it's easy to have that disconnect, and it takes time to maybe develop that as a good role player. But I think this is an opportunity to have my kids do that. So I opted ultimately to go ahead and just leave it in. And I'm going to leave it as is. And I'm going to watch it very closely when it comes up and just kind of let the kids figure it out and see how they work it, and, you know, intervene if I have to, or if I feel I need to, or if it's the best way to do it. You know, now me being a little bit of, you know, unintentionally being a little bit of a pessimist, I'm worried that, oh my God, this is too much for them, or they're gonna, what happens if I watch my kids insist that they run in and murder these things? Well, then I have to remind myself is they may be just fine, and they may understand the consequences of it, and they may think it through. And I think, and you know, my kids, I've never treated them like they're stupid or dumb or incapable of understanding something. You know, and this falls into that same principle that I've raised them with so far of never assume that they're too stupid to understand or that they're not capable of understanding. Maybe they are not, and as you talk with them, you realize that they are not, and you need to walk it back a little bit or approach it differently. But don't assume that they won't understand. Don't assume that they will make what are potentially poor choices when they do it. Give them the opportunity. And then if they, you know, if it doesn't land the way you kind of feel it should as a parent, that's when you intervene and say, well, I want you to take a couple steps back and rethink this. So that's how I've decided to approach this situation. And it's just also kind of a generalized discussion about morality in tabletop role-playing games. So if anybody has any comments about that or anything that they think is worth sharing in their experience or anything like that, let me know. Winner Mute out.